Hey everyone, it's Coach Patrick here from Endurance Nation. I want to thank you for joining me tonight for a very special guest webinar. Part of our educational series here is to get you guys up to speed as much as possible on everything you need to know to be your best on race day. And as we know, there's a variety of different things that impact your performance inside Endurance Nation. We do a very good job of working with you to customize your schedule and get you the right workout, help you navigate that space. But there's a whole other part of long course triathlon and endurance sports in general that we don't specialize in. And we're very fortunate to have partners with the Core Diet. And our guest tonight, Jesse Kropelnicki. Jesse, for those of you who don't know, he's already authored a bunch of stuff which we have on our site, including a previous webinar. He's an elite/pro travel triathlon coach. He founded QT2 Systems, the brand of endurance preparation businesses, which includes the Core Diet among many others. And you'll see the QT2 logo all over, not just on race day at the front of the pack, but also online. He's the coach for many pro athletes, including TJ Tollickson, Lindsey Corbin, Angela Nath, Pedro Gomes, among others. His interests are coaching professional triathletes using quantitative training and nutrition protocols. And I can't stress it enough. Nothing that Jesse says he has not tested or checked out. He is so dialed in, it's not even funny. He's a USAT Level 3 certified coach, as well as an author. So he's got a new book out right now called Endurance Training Diet and Cookbook, which is available in stores now. I strongly advise you guys to check it out. Jesse, how you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for the intro, Patrick.
No worries, no worries. Now, I'm going to do some admin stuff here behind the scenes here to make sure that you are, in fact, our presenter. But as we do that, for everyone who's listening, I just want to make sure that you guys know that you guys are going to have questions as we go. Please type them in, and we'll get them as we go across the call. And well, ideally, but make sure we stay at the end. It'll be about 10 minutes left at the very end to do Q&A with you guys. So don't hesitate to go ahead and type those questions in. We'll get them as they come. We've got a great presentation tonight. Jesse talked to me about it a little bit, so I'm super excited. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jesse, and away you go.
Thanks again, Patrick. I've got a double screen. I just want to make sure I'm sharing the proper one.
No problem.
Can you see? Do you see the presentation slide, or do you see the desktop?
No, I see you right here with the slide with the double black sides. That's
Perfect. Good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, guys. So as Patrick said tonight, we've got a presentation webinar on race fueling. I've done this previously for Endurance Nation. I believe it's in your member area. It's been there for many years. I think Patrick and I recorded the first one probably 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm happy to say that we haven't changed our minds in the last 5 years. Everything that applied 5 years ago still applies today. We've changed very little in our approaches with nutrition and race fueling. What Patrick asked me to do tonight was talk a little bit about race fueling, but with a natural twist to it. As many of you may know, there is questions that have come up more recently, I would say in the last 4 to 5 years, with athletes who want to take a more natural approach. So I'm going to go through a little bit of repeat stuff when it comes to race fueling, just for those folks that haven't watched the previous webinar. But then for each of the categories, whether we're talking about carbohydrate loading, race morning nutrition with breakfast, race day nutrition during the race itself, I'm going to talk about a natural option. Fortunately, with race week, carbohydrate load, even race morning breakfast, everything's pretty natural already. Where things change is on race day and specific fuels. So that's the area where we'll probably concentrate the most. So that's kind of the overview. With that, I'm just going to dive into things here. And as Patrick said, I'll run about 50 minutes, and we'll leave about 10 minutes left at the end for Q&A. So first things first, every presentation that I give, I go through what I call my 5 cornerstones. First of those is training. The second one is nutrition and restorative techniques. I call those first 2 preparatory activities. These are things that we do in preparation for race day. Number 3, I have race fueling. Number 4, I have race pacing. Those are execution-related activities. These are things that we do on race day to hopefully bring out the sacrifices that were made in preparation and show our fitness on race day. And lastly, mental fitness. Now, those 5 come together to form the race outcome. Tonight, we're going to focus mostly on nutrition and restorative techniques. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview up front on the general core diet approaches, meaning how to eat between training sessions, but then mostly focus on the race fueling, as I stated earlier. So a little bit on nutrition first. So what is the core diet? What is the approach that we take before we even think about race fueling? Just in summary, the objective is to allow athletes, and non-athletes for that matter, to stay lean and healthy on a daily basis, ongoing over many years, hopefully. Allow athletes to recover in ways that result in improved immune system, improved performance, just general improved recovery, therefore able to handle more training stress. As athletes, the more training stress that we can handle and absorb, the more progress that we make, regardless of what toolbox or genetic capability that we're born with. So nutrition obviously plays a vital role in that process of supercompensation, our ability to actually absorb the training stress that we apply. The approach that we take, the core diet, really adjust the macronutrient profiles throughout the season. That means protein, carbohydrates, and fats. Adjust themselves throughout the season depending on what the athlete's training volume, or I should say training stress, is. Okay. The idea, in general, with the core diet is to primarily eat foods that humans have evolved on for millions of years. So, namely, the core foods are lean meats, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, and lean dairy. Okay, so very similar to a paleo-type diet, except that we include legumes and lean dairy, and we also include some foods that have grains and even refined sugars in some cases. We just have some specific rules around how we do that. So the core refers to those foods or the way that we eat throughout the day while between workouts, sticking to those core foods. These are generally the foods that have the highest nutrient density for recovery between workouts. They are also, by no surprise, also low glycemic, mostly because of their significant fat, fiber, and protein content. This all helps keep blood sugar stable throughout the day when you aren't needing excessive amounts of blood sugar support any of the training that you're doing, meaning when you're at the office, you're at your day job, between training sessions, we generally want to keep blood sugar as stable as possible, okay? These foods also stimulate recovery by including the protein in there, keeping the blood sugar stable, and of course also providing that great vitamin and mineral content. So that's why we call these the core foods. They're really the fundamentals of good nutrition. They're the fundamentals of recovery and really performance, but between training sessions, okay? This is not fueling. This is nutrition. I like to think of nutrition as how we eat between workouts. I think of fueling is what we do during workouts and on race day. So as the endurance athlete, as I've stated already, our job is to really keep blood sugar stable throughout the day. A couple of ways to do that. One is by eating very frequently, so never going more than 2 to 3 hours without putting something in your body. And at the same time, doing it with low glycemic index foods. It just so happens all of the core foods that I previously mentioned tend to be all pretty low glycemic load. Most of them are low glycemic index as well. Again, heavy in fat, fiber, and protein. And remember that. I mentioned that a couple of times for a reason, because when we get to race fueling, let's say, avoidance of fat, fiber, and protein is a critical concept to have involved in race day fueling, whereas during the day, that's a critical set of things that you want to have in the foods that you eat because they all do help keep blood sugar stable, okay? It's a common misconception there. We'll develop that more as we get into some of the slides later on. So our job as the endurance athlete, again, here is to keep blood sugar stable through the ways I just mentioned. Choose the best choice in each micronutrient or macronutrient category between workouts. What does that mean? It really means if we're going to pick a carbohydrate, if we're going to pick a protein, if we're going to pick a fat, as we sit down and have our first real meal after a major workout, we want to choose the best foods possible in each one of those categories to provide the nutrient density. In general, that means we're focused on the core foods, okay? We save the low nutrient density fuels, meaning the grains, refined sugars, things that are void of fat and fiber, for either just before or during the workouts where they have a specific purpose. See, the foods that are generally void of fat, fiber, and protein are generally the ones that are also void of nutrient density, okay? But see, before pre-workout or during workout, we're not particularly concerned with nutrient density. We really support the immunity, we support recovery of the muscle tissue via the core foods that do have the nutrient density, but we do that between workouts. Therefore, it allows us during the workouts to maybe not do that and instead avoid GI distress, okay? Those are some of the basics there of the core diet. We use windows. So there's a pre-workout window, a recovery drink period, which is immediately following your workout, a post-workout window, and then the remainder of the day. So pre-workout, we usually utilize a 1 hour window where it's okay to have non-core foods. These are usually grains or refined sugars that are low in nutrient density, but at the same time, for those same reasons, they generally don't irritate your stomach or your GI or cause GI distress during the workout, particularly if it's a run. So again, during that period, we're more concerned with getting blood sugar up than we are about nutrient density. Then during the workout itself is the fueling, which is what I'm going to talk about the whole 80% of this presentation once I'm through these first couple slides. Immediately post-workout, we have our recovery drink. Ideally, that recovery drink is high glycemic, meaning a high glycemic sugar source, usually a very simple sugar, and a very easily digested, good quality protein source. Most recovery drinks utilize a whey protein for that. It does fit the bill very well. Then we use a post-workout window that's as long as the workout was, okay? Why is it as long as the workout was? Because in general, during workouts, you replace about 50% of the expenditures if you have good fueling habits that you bleed into your workouts themselves. You replace another 25% of the deficit that was created from the workout with the recovery drink. That last 25%, you utilize that post-workout window to replace it. So obviously 25% of the deficit from a 1-hour workout is a much smaller quantity than it is from a 5-hour workout. Therefore, you get a longer period post-workout to get it back in. So that's another area where you can have grains. We generally like to utilize wholer grains, though, during that post-workout window. At least your body's still susceptible to the higher glycemic carbohydrates. Then, of course, the remainder of the day, we're focused on the core foods, the lean proteins, fruits, vegetables, seeds, legumes, lean dairy. Okay. So I was just talking through this concept, and I'll reiterate it here. But why does this work? Really, because during the workouts, if you do a really good job with your fueling, you replace about 50%. That post-workout recovery drink replaces 25. That leaves the post-workout window to replace the other 25. So generally, what that means is during the off season, you're utilizing that post-workout window to go ahead and go to the holiday party and have holiday cookies and cake and really whatever. That's generally the mechanism to put on weight during the off season, which for athletes that did get very lean during the race season, that's an important thing to do. So it's okay to overshoot that 25% deficit that's left. But generally, as athletes get into the new year, January, February timeframe, around where we are now, most athletes definitely don't want to put on any more weight. They're usually trying to start pulling it back. What we usually have athletes do at that point is utilize the post-workout window, but keep it very, very whole grains. That automatically, again, due to the fat, fiber, and protein content, kind of automatically starts to curtail the amount of caloric intake that's had during that post-workout window. When athletes are in a position where they have more than 8 pounds that they want to lose prior to a key race, what we do is we have them remove that post-workout window altogether, and that's the mechanism to create the deficit to actually lose the weight. Okay. Some miscellaneous things on questions we get all the time. Alcohol, I'm not going to read through these. I'm going to stay more focused on the race fueling, the back half of this presentation. But I did want to throw this slide in here just so that you guys have the knowledge if you haven't already had a nutrition plan from us or watched one of the other webinars that we have available in your member area. All right, so I'm going to delve now right into race fueling, which is, of course, the focus. And we'll kind of go from there. And as I said, I'm going to bring in as much context when it comes to natural fueling as possible. So what are some of the common areas with fueling plans? Athletes that have no plan, that have the random plan, or that have the bad plan. Those are the 3 types. All 3 of those, none of them work, okay? We want to have a plan that is correct for the physiology of the athlete, meaning it's commensurate with their sodium losses, carbohydrate needs, and fluid losses, and that it is put together well and executed well on race day. That's really what we're looking for. But even if you do all of those things, if you don't practice it properly in training, there's no guarantee that your body is going to be able to handle it on race day. I tell people this all the time. If you went to your first Ironman and didn't do any training, how do you think that race would go? You'd go to the race, you'd try to do the race, and if I asked you afterwards how it went, you'd say, awful, Ironman's not for me, forget this. Well, you look at me when I say that now and you say, well, that's crazy, of course I would train, but for some reason when it comes to fueling, nobody has that attitude. They suddenly on race day try to step up the amount of nutrition that they have and that they generally have in training. Even if it's the correct amount that their body requires for race day, they usually haven't practiced it to the level of detail or diligence that they should have in training. Therefore, when they try to have it on race day, it doesn't work. They throw up, they get a bloated stomach, they have cramping issues. And what do they usually do after the race? They say, oh, it was just a bad plan. Back to the drawing board. I got to get a different fueling plan. You know, if you put together the fueling plan with good logic, such as the logic I'm going to teach you here tonight, it's not that the plan was bad. It's just that you didn't practice it. It's just like training and racing. You don't just go to a race and not practice the training. It's the same thing with fueling. I guess the key takeaway here is that just because you have a certain physiological need doesn't mean you have the gut to be able to handle what your body requires. And I know that sounds crazy, but we see it all the time, particularly if you're a higher sweat rate individual. Again, you don't necessarily have the gut that's able to handle what your body requires, all right? Similarly here, if you improperly pace the day, you run the risk of putting on heat stress earlier on in the day, which makes it much more difficult to handle even a proper race fueling plan that was put together properly. And of course, many athletes don't even take that step and put it together properly. But even if you do realize that improper pacing, particularly in warm weather, can cause stomach bloating issues. If there's a single carbohydrate source in your fueling plan, that's a very common error. Generally causes GI distress later in the day. Mostly for Ironman, you may be able to get away with single sources in 70.3. A lot of athletes fall into that trap as well. They have what they think is a great race fueling plan that they utilize for sprint, for Olympic, and for half Ironman. Then they step up to Ironman and they say, boy, I'm going to just extrapolate it, I'm going to double the quantities or whatever it is, and all of a sudden they have massive issues. It's just that the fueling plan wasn't put together properly for a race that's 10 plus hours. Okay, I'll say this: most athletes don't realize the amount of fluid that they require, and most athletes don't realize the amount of sodium that they require. And those are two key things when you start talking about trying to do fueling with natural sources. The thing is that most natural sources don't automatically include the amount of sodium per gram of carbohydrate that your body requires. So some of the common pitfalls when athletes try to take a natural fueling approach is they automatically just don't get enough sodium, and if they try to replace it, they usually don't replace enough. So we'll talk about that a little bit more here as we go. So I'm going to reiterate the practice. Why do we practice so much our race fueling and training? To train the gut, to be able to handle what the body requires. It's probably the most important thing in long course. I'm going to reiterate this again towards the end of the presentation. Improve the workout quality and recovery. Of course, we never want athletes to be nutritionally limited in their training. You make a lot of sacrifices on a daily basis to do intense sessions and really put yourself out there all in an effort to hopefully improve your fitness. The last thing we want is a session that's limited by nutrition or the lack thereof, right? We make enough sacrifices, let's get that right. So that's why it's also important to practice that. Again, just because you have a high sweat rate doesn't mean you have a superhuman gut to be able to handle what your body requires. And of course, if you practice very often, you get very good at being able to transport the fuels as well. That one's of lesser importance, okay? So those are some of the key things when it comes to practice. When you think back to the fueling window slide that I had just in the general nutrition section, I had that area that you would normally see what race fuels or what training fuels you'd be having. One thing you'll notice is that when I was talking about body composition, how to tweak it throughout the year, and removing the post-workout window, I never mentioned take out your race fuel. So, in Ironman racing or Ironman distance racing, I would say that 60 to 70% of the athletes on the course are limited, probably more, are limited by their race fueling, okay? Therefore, the probably most important thing we can do as an athlete is practice our race fueling 365 days a year. So regardless of what you have going on with body composition, you should never touch the race fueling. You want to keep that the same year-round. So A, you don't have nutritionally limited training sessions and wash all of your sacrifices down the toilet. And B, you're practicing and improving, hopefully, probably the biggest limiter that you're likely to have on race day, your ability to handle the race day nutrition. So we never mess with what we're doing during the training session. Instead, we edit or change what we're doing around the training sessions and have a little bit more discipline between the sessions themselves. Okay, carbohydrate loading. Here are the recommendations. We have it here for Ironman, half Ironman, Olympic distance racing. The specific quantitative amounts, you guys can calculate these on your own. It's pretty straightforward, but that's generally what we want to be having in the days leading into the race. So on race week, we're eating in accordance with the core diet, which was the first little segment I had in this presentation, until for Ironman 2 days before the race, but definitely up until 24 to 36 hours before the race. That's where it's important to start a very specific carbohydrate loading strategy. So the carbohydrate loading strategy is pretty darn straightforward, and the most important day is the day before the race. That's where we have our largest meal at breakfast the day before the race. We generally want to get that breakfast in by about 8:30 in the morning, usually not much later than that. Otherwise, we run the risk of not clearing out our GI prior to the race morning. That's something we certainly want to do. We generally like to get half of the carbohydrate contents that you see on this slide the day before the race in by noon the day before the race, okay? Again, this ensures that we have plenty of time to clear out the GI and allows the whole back half of the day to kind of taper down the foods. When done correctly, the last meal is a little bit of pasta, a little bit of chicken breast, very light. You should go to bed almost a little bit hungry. So the foods that we're focused on with the carbohydrate load are those that are not the core foods at all. So we're eating the core foods 360 days a year. It's totally fine for one day before your key race not to have any nutrient density. It's the fruits and vegetables and the salads we had every day for 360 days that affect our immunity, our overall well-being, our health, our ability to recover from workouts. See, the day before the race, we're more focused on performance and therefore keeping things out of our GI system that may slow down digestion. So I've talked a lot about fat, fibers, and proteins and why they're such a good thing during the day within the core foods to keep blood sugar stable. That's the exact reason why they're not good here. So fat, fibers, and proteins, they slow down digestion and therefore dilute the blood sugar response of any carbohydrate that you may have. Again, exact reason why we don't want to have them during the final 24 hours before the race. The last thing we want are foods that go through your GI system very slow. We want things that go through quick so that we can clear out our GI to handle the race day fuels. Okay, this is a common mistake because athletes say, boy, it's the day before my race. I want to be really healthy. I'm going to have a nice big salad for lunch. And again, it's about the salad you have for the prior 360 days, not the one you have the day before the race. Okay. So far, as I've talked about the core diet, as I've talked about carbohydrates, this is all natural already. There's no real changes to our what I would call our typical performance-based race fueling plan for somebody that wants to take a natural approach. Even if you're gluten-free, we have a lot of athletes that we've worked with via the core diet that are gluten-free athletes, and you can certainly do your entire carbohydrate load gluten-free. You can even have pancakes the day before the race at breakfast that are gluten-free. So no major changes yet, okay? Here are some of the typical carbohydrate loading items. Pancake, syrup, jelly, toast, bagels, white bread, you know, pretzels, pasta, rice. Again, things that are very simple. I really like pretzels in there because they include quite a bit of sodium. They have a similar sodium content per gram of carbohydrate as a gel, which also serves us well from a sodium loading perspective. We definitely want to avoid butter, mayonnaise, cheese, fibrous fruits, veggies, and grains, no whole wheat anything. Again, we're trying to stay away from any massive amounts of fat, fiber, or protein. Anything that would slow down the GI system or slow down digestion, we actually want to stay totally away from here. So here's an example carbohydrate loading program for an Ironman. This is for a 160-pound male, 2 days before the race and then the day before the race. Pretty darn straightforward. Again, any of the food items, if you want to take a natural approach, any of the food items here that you feel are not natural, they can easily be switched out for a similar nutrition item that doesn't have fat, doesn't have fiber, doesn't have a massive amount of protein. Pretty straightforward. Typical race morning breakfast. So we've got through our carbohydrate load, we've gotten a race day, now it's race morning. We're generally having our race morning breakfast about 3 hours before half Ironman and 3.5 hours before Ironman. The amount is about 1 times your lean body weight in grams of carbohydrate. Okay, so the example and very typical breakfast that we move forward with in almost all of the fueling plans that our dietitians put together includes some quantity of unsweetened applesauce, a banana, a scoop of whey protein, and a whole bottle of sport drink. What we do is we tweak the amount of unsweetened applesauce that's in that race morning breakfast based on this 1 times the lean body weight to get the total amount of carbohydrates that we need. The unsweetened applesauce is in there because it does act to help athletes kind of clear out before the race, and everyone knows what I mean by that. We have a banana in there to provide some potassium. Many of the race day fuels that you have the remainder of the day are fairly heavy in carbohydrate, sodium, and fluid, but they tend to be lower in potassium, so it's good to load more of a chronic mineral like potassium before the race starts. That's why the banana's in there, and of course its own carbohydrate content. It happens to be very low in fiber, so there's no issues there. A scoop of whey protein, this is in there to provide branched-chain amino acids. There have been several studies over the years that have shown some BCAAs, or branched-chain amino acids, do improve performance in endurance events. So we like to include that in the race morning breakfast. Now, depending on what your definition is of natural or what your values are or how far you want to go with it, I'm sorry, I didn't change the slide. Many folks don't mind whey protein, so that can be totally fine. If you didn't want to have a powdered whey protein because you didn't feel that was natural, you're welcome to go with something like 3 egg whites, which has great amino acid content, which will provide a similar amount of protein as 1 scoop of whey protein. I will mention this later, but I'll mention it now because I've already brought up whey here a little bit. If you're going to choose a whey protein powder and you want it to be void of artificial sweeteners and thickeners and all the garbage that's mostly in popular whey protein sources out there, I would recommend the Clean Athlete Whey Protein. It literally has one ingredient, whey protein. Not big on taste, of course, because it doesn't have a lot of the other crap in it, but it's a very natural, very clean whey protein powder. But again, if you didn't even want to go that far, you can easily do 3 egg whites. Me, myself, I've certainly done that when I was racing several times, just went with the egg whites. So either way works. Then we have the whole bottle of sport drink in there. Depending, again, on what your definition of natural is, Scratch Labs makes a great drink that doesn't have any artificial sweeteners or colorings or anything like that. They're probably the leader when it comes to natural sports drinks, meaning not having any other stuff in it other than just straight up sugar, okay? So those are some of the basics there when it comes to the sport drink, and again, we'll develop that more here as we go forward. But that's a great example, race morning breakfast, and how to tweak it for the natural approach if you'd like to take it. And in my opinion, and as we go through this, as we talk about the natural options in any of these categories, I'm going to give you my thoughts on what potential impact it may have on performance or just logistics. And honestly, in this case, so far, if you switch it out for the natural stuff, there's no impact, in my opinion, on performance or potential GI distress or anything like that. These are very simple switch outs that shouldn't have any impact at all. Okay, so what we should do then is take a sweat test. We need to understand, as input into the race fueling program itself, what we're doing on race day, what your sweat rates are. There's a couple of ways to do this. The dietitians at the Core Diet generally have athletes do a 1 hour, what we call sweat test. It's something you can do at home very easily. It's at your zone 2, and I'll define what that means. Zone 2 is kind of half Ironman intensity or slightly less. Inside on a trainer at 70 degrees, typical room temperature with a fan. Record your weight prior to that little test, and then post that test. Make sure you record how much fluid you consume. Based on that, you get the amount of weight lost. You know how many ounces of fluid you had. Realize that each pound that you lost equals 16 ounces of fluid loss. From that, as shown in this table, you can calculate out what your total sweat loss is per hour. Okay? So that's how we can get an idea of what your sweat rates are. There are simpler ways to do it, and I'm going to walk through that here. And honestly, when I work with athletes, I prefer to use this method even versus the more what looks like scientific method of taking the at-home sweat test. So the bottom line is that athletes should pee twice in Ironman and a minimum of once in 70.3. If you're not doing that, then you're not drinking enough, you're dehydrated, and it's probably impacting your performance, almost guaranteed. So think about the various races that you've done in the past, what the conditions were, and how many times you peed and how many bottles you drank. For instance, if you know you raced in an 80-degree weather environment, you had 4 bottles on the bike in 70.3 and you didn't pee, well then we know that you probably require more than 4 bottles. If you rode a 4-hour bike split, we know you require more than 1 bottle an hour. So you can very quickly hone in on the amount of fluid required just based on your own race experiences and various conditions. Okay? Once you have that information, you can very quickly and easily figure out how much sodium you actually require. Realize that sodium requirements are mostly driven by the amount of fluid loss, not necessarily so much about how much sodium you actually have in your sweat. Sure, there's plenty of variance there, but the reality is the sweat losses or the fluid losses are the bigger driver of those 2 items, and they really drive most of the sodium content or sodium loss or sodium requirement, I should say. So realize that sodium content in sweat generally ranges from about 450 milligrams to 600 milligrams per 16 ounces. So if you know you require a bottle an hour, you know that's 24 ounces an hour. If you make the assumption that, okay, I've never had cramping problems in my life, therefore I'm probably at the lower end of the range that Jesse recommended. If you say, okay, I know I'm losing 24 ounces an hour based on the sweat test stuff that I just went over, I'm going to assume that I'm about a 450 milligrams of sodium per 16 ounces sweat guy. That means in 24 ounces, it's 50% greater, right? 24 divided by 16, multiplied times the 450, gives me about 650 to 700 milligrams. So you can see very quickly I start to understand what the sodium needs are for that particular athlete per hour. So now we know the fluid content or requirement per hour. Now we know the sodium content or requirement per hour. Okay, so that's kind of how we walk through that process. So the fueling plan that you're putting together really just simply looks at the fluid content per hour, sodium needs per hour, and then carbohydrate needs per hour, which I'm going to show you how to get on the next slide. So far, we've gotten the fluids and we've gotten the sodium. Okay. Once you put all that together and you understand the quantities required per hour, it's really of less importance how you get it. So you can get it from natural fuels. You can get it from a fabricated package of artificial sugar and whatever. But the bottom line is those are the big three: carbohydrate, fluid, and sodium. You can't argue with how much your body needs. The question is just how you want to get it and what's logistically easier for you, and or what your values are as a person. Meaning, do you care about artificial sugars? Do you care about artificial colors? If you do, well, then you put together a natural approach to get you the same quantities of the big three. Those big three, the quantities there, that doesn't change regardless of what approach you take. It just becomes how you fulfill it. That is the decision. All right, but we're going to talk about some of the pitfalls you could fall into if you're not careful with it. First, let me walk through how to get the carbohydrate requirements here. So we're generally eating very frequently on race days, similar to between workout nutrition. We're trying to keep blood sugar stable. I like to say, stay off the blood sugar roller coaster. So that's the motto between workout sessions. That's the motto on race day. Okay, we want to keep blood sugar stable. We want to stay off that roller coaster. That means never drinking water, only drinking your sports drink, or homemade drink. If you want to take a natural approach, basically a carbohydrate, sodium, and fluid solution is what you want to be having regularly. You definitely want to avoid water. Water just puts a blank in the system, generally lets blood sugar fall, puts us on the blood sugar roller coaster, doesn't have the sodium that your body requires to be able to absorb it. So we definitely want to be having that caloric drink at all times, and that's also what we're training with so that we become very used to having that. It's generally not a problem at all. The quantity of carbohydrate that athletes need, I have on the slide in the third bullet, generally about 5/8 the lean body weight in pounds in grams of carbohydrate. So from that, you can figure out your hourly carbohydrate requirement on the bike. So now once I've gotten that, I know my fluid requirement, I know my sodium requirement, and I know my carbohydrate requirement, okay? Those are the big three. The only other thing, and I'll talk about it a little bit during this presentation, is caffeine. Obviously, it's not required, but for those of you that like to utilize caffeine, this is the recommendation. Usually, athletes are having between 1 to 2 times their body weight in pounds in milligrams of caffeine. So somewhere between 150 to 300 milligrams for the 150-pound athlete, and being very careful on how we utilize the caffeine. So that means for half Ironman racing, generally we don't have any caffeine until 15 or 30 minutes before the start of the race. For Ironman racing, there is no need at all whatsoever to have any caffeine until at least 3 to 4 hours into the race. The last thing you need is a nervous system stimulant. During the first 3 to 4 hours of the race, you're already excited, you've trained for months, your friends and family are there, there's music, Mike Riley's yelling at you. You need to calm down. Last thing you need is more caffeine. So where we need the caffeine is the back half of the day, when you're tired, when you're out on the course alone, your peripheral system is getting fatigued. That's where we want to ramp into our caffeine content. So that's our general approach to caffeine loading throughout race day. How you get it, again, is up to you, right? So we have the big three, and then I'll add to that kind of caffeine for those of you that like it. How you get it, again, is up to you. Our preference and what we generally take, our approach that we generally take with race fueling plans with athletes is we want it to be as simple as possible, no logistical errors. And that's one of the biggest differences between a true performance-based fueling plan and a natural fueling plan. See, a natural fueling plan, you could certainly still get the same quantities of the big three. It's just going to be more difficult for you because you're probably going to have to mix your own stuff. You're probably going to have to carry more things, which just makes it harder. That's one of the primary differences, okay? All right, so continuing forward here. So in terms of the fuels, we generally like to have fuels on race day, particularly for the long course. For Ironman distance racing, we generally like to have fuels that have a blend of carbohydrate sources, fructose, maltodextrin, dextrose. The bigger the blend, the more likely it is that we have no problem absorbing it. We don't run into GI issues. Those products ideally are going to have sodium contents that are consistent with that whole sweat test procedure that I talked through. That means around 600 to, I'll even say 2,000 milligrams per hour, depending on the athlete's sweat rate and sodium content in their sweat. I've already mentioned to avoid the water, replace it with endurance sports drink or your homemade drink, which I'll talk about a little bit later. The idea is to keep blood sugar stable. For those of you that say, well, I can't do that, I just get sick of the sugar, it just means you have not practiced it enough. I promise you, it all comes back to practice. If you went out your first time taking a step on the run course and just tried to run 3 hours, you would never make it, right? So it took a lot of practice to get you to the point where you can stay on your feet and run for 3 hours. It's the same thing here, okay? But ideally, we want to keep the plan simple to avoid making mistakes. All right, so a little bit about natural fuels here. You know, what does natural really mean? At the end of the day, it depends on who you talk to. Some athletes say, well, I want a natural plant. I don't want this manufactured stuff. Well, what is this manufactured stuff? Let's say it's a power gel, where there's maltodextrin, dextrose, and fructose in it. Those sugars still occur naturally in various places. Your blood sugar does not know the difference on what type of sugar it was that got you to the bloodstream or to the increased blood sugar. At the end of the day, it's really up to the person on what they consider natural, and many people are just kind of unfounded in the concept. To some people, you know, natural means I don't want to have an artificial color, I don't want to have an artificial sweetener because I feel that, and from my value standpoint, I feel that that must have a bad impact on the body. I feel that that may give you cancer or whatever it may be. For other people, you know, natural means it has to be organic. So it really depends on what it means. Regardless, as long as you meet the big three and stay away from fat, fiber, and protein, you're going to be okay. It's just going to be a little bit more complex for you to deal with from a logistical standpoint. So we're going to talk through some of that and also give some examples here, okay? All right. Just to kind of, I guess, elaborate on the last bullet I have here. Like I said, it can be done, takes more effort. The most common issue is that the natural sources are just going to be void in sodium. So those types of race fueling plans, when I see people try to take the more natural approach, more than likely they run into stomach bloating issues, A, because they had too much fat or fiber in it, and or they just didn't have enough sodium, because you're more likely to get lulled into having too low sodium when you're using natural fuels, unless you have a significant amount of supplementation on top of it, all right? Okay, so what are some natural fuels that our dietitians have utilized to put together a natural race fueling plan? So, you know, again, our dietitians have done thousands and thousands of race fueling plans for athletes all over the world, generally doing a performance-based nutrition plan that's going to use the products that make it the easiest for the athlete, which are the products that are on the course, power gels, you know, certain drinks, so on and so forth. But we also do natural fueling plans. We don't have it on our website, but if an athlete comes to us and says, my values, I want to have this, this, and this in my fueling plan, I want to take a natural approach, our dietitians will do that. Here are the products that we generally utilize in those fueling plans because these products generally have a little bit more sodium. They have a diverse sugar source, which is some of the values that we still want to have in it from a performance standpoint. And they're very low in fat and fiber. So those are some of the key things, and easy to carry and very practical, right? You're not out on the bike cooking up something on the griddle. So the first one would be Fuel for Fire, which also is a partner of the Core Diet. It's just fruit along with whey protein. So again, depending on what your definition of natural is, many people who say I want a natural fueling plan, they're okay with whey protein, but not okay if it has artificial sugars, so or artificial sweeteners or colors or that sort of thing. So Fuel for Fire could be a great option for those folks. It's just blended fruit with whey protein, and that's it. Very simple, works very well as a pre-race breakfast item, very similar to the applesauce that I had in the example before. Works great as a pre-workout item. To be honest, I utilize it pretty often before I go out for runs or bike rides. It's a great product, again, very natural, very helpful, not a problem at all. Here's a code, a discount code for their website for anyone that wants to grab Fuel for Fire. As I mentioned earlier, the Clean Athlete Whey Protein is only whey, no artificial sweeteners or colors, great clean product, no pun intended. The Human Gels, they're chia seed based, but they do have good sodium and good carbohydrate content quality. A little bit of fiber, a little bit of fat, a little bit of protein, but not a massive amount, mostly focused on carbohydrate and good sodium content, which is half the battle. The Clif Organic Energy Pouches, they're great. They're a little bit larger, again, logistically a little bit more difficult. I wouldn't want to only fuel on those for race day because you'd get too much fat. But if you incorporated one or two of those on the bike in Ironman, you get a little bit of fat out of it, not enough to really slow down digestion or cause GI distress or issues. They also have good sodium content. Power Bar makes a simple fruit energy food. It's another little packet, very similar to Fuel for Fire, but without the protein. They do add some external sugar to the fruit, blended fruit in this case, but it's generally natural, no artificial stuff for the most part, very low in fat, fiber, and protein. So a great power gel replacement, but again, low in sodium, so therefore you'd have to supplement with additional sodium to make that work. The Honey Stinger Organic Waffles are great. Fat content, again, here is a little bit high, and sodium's a bit low, but the carbohydrate content is great. Again, I wouldn't want to have the Honey Stinger Organic Waffles for my entire race fueling plan, but if I incorporated one that's no problem. You know, always go back to what I said before. Having a blend of different carbohydrate sources is a key thing. So if you're going to put together a natural fueling plan from this slide, don't just pick one of these things. You know, pick several of them and use a blend of them. Skratch Labs makes one of the best sport hydration drinks or endurance sports drinks. It's natural, it doesn't have any artificial sugar or colors. Also, which is rare, includes the proper amount of sodium, which again, most of the natural fueling products don't by default include the sodium. They're one of the rare ones that do, so it makes it a great option. Simply Bananas are great, obviously very low in sodium, but low in fiber, low in fat, low in protein, good potassium content, so bananas on race day are good, but logistically difficult. They're larger, they squish real easy, they don't taste real good if you've been in 90-degree heat for 5 hours with a banana in your pocket. So that's kind of the challenge there. Or portables. You know, this was popularized over the last several years by the Feed Zone. And we're going to take a look at some portable recipes that our dietitians have modified and adapted from some of the earlier versions of it. I'm going to have that on some of the subsequent slides here. So the next 4 or 5 slides, I have some great natural fuels that can be homemade for both pre-workout, during your workouts, and even on race day, that are certainly natural. You're making these yourselves. I'm not going to walk through each one of these recipes and talk through how to make it, but I wanted them here as reference for you guys in the recipes. You guys will have access to the slides later. This banana nut bread, is in my new book that Patrick mentioned, the Endurance Sports and Training Cookbook. This recipe is a great recipe. I've utilized it for years. It's great as a little pre-workout snack during that 1 hour prior to workouts. You can make it at home. Again, I wouldn't necessarily use this during workouts because it's a little heavy in fat and protein content and fiber as well. But for pre-workout, it's just fine. I wouldn't use it pre-race day either. This one just has a little bit of a lengthy ingredient list and directions manual. The nutrition facts per slice: 35 grams of carbohydrate, 250 milligrams of sodium. So good carbohydrate content, good sodium content, also has good protein content. Perfect for pre-workout. Here are some portable recipes for during your workouts and or during race day. So you can utilize some of the prepackaged or manufactured so-called natural fueling products that I had on the prior slides, or you can make your own. These are some options to make your own. So apple cinnamon portable squares, very simple recipe, easy to make, mostly sourcing the carbohydrates from dates and raisins and apples, and then adding an appropriate amount of sodium. So we end up with nutrition facts that have 22 grams of carbohydrate, 234 milligrams of sodium. Honestly, it's almost identical to a power gel in terms of carbohydrate content and sodium content, and we mix up the sugar source. From a performance standpoint, what's the risk here? Not a lot. It's mostly more difficult to carry. Obviously, you got to make them ahead of time, and you're going to get a little bit of fiber out of it. So the key is, if you're going to include a little bit of fiber, you just need to make sure you practice with this day in and day out. And honestly, you can use a hybrid approach too. If you're concerned that you don't want to be having packaged or manufactured food items all the time, you can utilize these natural fuels that I'm going over in your training, which is the lion's share of the race fuels or the during exercise fuels that you take in. But then on race day, switch to the more manufactured version. So therefore, in training, when you're having this stuff chronically, you're taking a natural approach. But for the one day on race day where you're more concerned with performance, you switch it over. That's a values decision. That's totally up to you. The main thing in training, though, is not necessarily that you use the exact products that you're going to use on race day. It's that you make sure you're hitting the same quantities of fluid, carbohydrate, and sodium. So that's why it's okay and probably acceptable to go ahead and take a natural approach in training, but then turn the dial over to performance on race day, if you so want to, right? It's totally up to you. It's a values call. Here's another portable, the Fig Date portable squares, very similar to the previous one, similar carbohydrate and sodium content, another great option. In terms of drinks, for those of you that don't want to have any powdered drink, even the Skratch Labs one, if you don't consider that natural because it's a powder, you can make your own sports drinks. They're fairly straightforward, and honestly, I've got 2 different recipes here. You can switch out the flavors with other juices, fruit juices that you may want to utilize, but some quantity of sugar, salt, and juice. So again, we're getting carbohydrate, sodium, and fluid here. That's the big 3. From a nutrition fact standpoint, 50 grams of carbohydrate per 24-ounce bottle, 575 milligrams of sodium. That's the same as Power Bar Endurance. That's the same as Gatorade Endurance. That's the same as Base Hydro. So very similar of the big 3, which is the key. Okay. And here's a great flavored version, same nutrition facts, very straightforward. I wanted to include a couple slides in here of some of the popular nutrition products that are out there when it comes to drinks. And this is a summary slide. Obviously, I'm not going to talk through all this. Our staff and dietitians update this matrix periodically with new products as they come out. From a natural standpoint, Scratch Labs is going to be the best bet. But you can see how the Scratch exercise hydration mix matches up in terms of a sodium and carbohydrate content standpoint compared to some of the other more performance-based or non-natural, if you will, products that are out there. Okay. And just continuing that table, again, mostly for your reference, nothing I necessarily wanted to or needed to talk through, other than the fact that Scratch and potentially Osmo are your best bets when it comes to natural. The only issue with Osmo is it really doesn't contain that much sodium or carbohydrate, which again, that makes things more logistically difficult. That means you need to carry more of the natural carbohydrate and sodium and all that. So the more we can get from that bottle that you're going to be drinking commensurate with your sweat rates, that you pee twice in Ironman, once at 70.3, the better. It just cuts down on the additional amount of stuff that we need to carry and potentially drop and all those things that go wrong on race day. So from an electrolyte supplement standpoint, if I haven't made it clear already, ideally we're getting most of our sodium from those products that we're already consuming via the sweat losses, providing the big three. But if you're going to have to bring out an electrolyte supplement on race day. You'd be a fool not to. You never know what's going to go wrong on race day. If you feel a cramp, if you drop something, it's important to always have sodium available. It's a fool's game not to do that. And just don't bring Endurolites, please, for me. Endurolites have not even close to enough sodium, 60 milligrams of sodium per capsule. If you're not having enough sodium in your products that you're having commensurate with your sweat rate, I mean, you can easily be at a deficit of 800 milligrams per hour, and you'd have to take 10 per hour. It just makes it logistically impossible. So with that, I prefer base salt. Base salt is a lickable version of salt. Absorbed and cause some triggers just by having it on your palate. It's a little bit different than a lot of the other popular products that are out there that are in capsules. See, the capsule bypasses your tongue and your taste, and amazingly, the human body responds to just even tasting salt. It may even slow down the cramping reaction just by tasting it before it even gets to your bloodstream because your body knows what's coming. So that's base salt. Salt stick would be my second favorite, or any of the others that I have listed here are sufficient in terms of proper sodium content. Okay. All right, so a little bit on workouts. I kind of alluded to this. Outside of race fueling, obviously we're practicing the big three, carbohydrate, sodium, and fluid, every single day, 365 days a year during every single training session. Even if we want to improve our body composition, we do not do it during the sessions themselves. That runs too much of a risk that we won't be able to handle our race day fuels, which is potentially our biggest limiter. So it even includes the recovery runs, rides, everything. Main thing is same quantity as the fueling plan. You could certainly take more of a natural approach in training, especially if you're far out from race day. For those of you that really want to take a natural approach, I recommend that you do it in training for most of your training sessions. Once you're within 5 or 6 weeks of race day, if you're okay with it, I do recommend that you switch over to more of a performance-based approach that gets away from the natural approach. That's if you're truly just focused on performance. If you're not so focused on performance, and you have more in your value system to have a natural fuels, then go ahead and continue the natural fuels and develop the natural race fueling plan. But maybe a good balance is to do what I have here on the slide, which is take the more natural option approach in training for the lion's share of what you do, but then switch over to the performance-based approach during the final 6 weeks or so that you're ready for race day. But at the end of the day, the call is all yours. So just understand that the difference here is that with the natural fueling approach, it's just more logistically difficult. We run the risk of having a little bit more fiber, which could irritate the GI, and also maybe a little less diversity in the sugar sources. But as long as we train with it, you can still get through it okay, as long as you're not an insanely high sweat rate person who's got a very sensitive GI system. Okay. How much caffeine? I talked a little bit about the approach we take with caffeine. How much? Usually on a daily practical limit standpoint, we usually recommend that no athlete has more than 200 milligrams per day from all sources, and less than 1,000 milligrams per week for males, and less than 800 milligrams per week for females. That's kind of over the years, working with thousands and thousands of athletes, we see as kind of the practical threshold where you get the performance benefits from caffeine without some of the detriment. So that means using caffeine truly as a tool, specifically for your key workout sessions, not necessarily just drinking coffee around the office where it doesn't serve a purpose. If you do that, you'll find very quickly that you'll exceed these limits if you tally up everything that you have in a day. Metabolic efficiency training. Does it really even improve performance? Nobody even knows. It's never been proven definitely. You know, at the end of the day, most triathletes are already overstressed. Last thing we want to do is starve them during training sessions. So this is the approach where athletes stay away from carbohydrate. They try to increase fat content, even do partially starvation type workout sessions that are very lean on carbohydrate, or just eat fat during the workouts. Most of this stuff was developed by people who were trying to make money developing books around what seemed like a niche concept. Many athletes, I can tell you, have fallen for that. It's the primary limiter for athletes who try it at long course racing. That's the bottom line. You know, what you end up with is an athlete that really can't handle anything on race day. They've detrained their GI system so much that they can't even handle what their body requires. It has massive impacts for long course racing that are not good. You can pull it off for short course racing, but certainly not long course. So I did want to talk about that a little bit. What this shows is, you know, the average triathlete. Blue bar is what they can digest. The red is the carbohydrates their body requires. Therefore, the difference between those two, I like to call their available fueling window, or kind of their insurance policy, right? What the chances are that they're going to be able to handle what their body requires on race day. For the nutrition-stimulated metabolic efficiency person, the athlete that took a low-carb approach without sugar, without carbohydrates, and just fat, they generally detrain their gut at a faster rate than they reduce what they require from a carbohydrate standpoint. That means their available fueling window or insurance policy is very small, meaning the difference between what their body requires, which is less than the other guy for sure, but between what their body can handle is smaller than the other guy. Therefore, their insurance policy is very low. And honestly, I've seen many athletes who have tried to take that approach who have ended up in a position where that blue bar is lower than the red bar, meaning they have a negative fueling window. They have no chance that they're going to be able to handle and digest and take in on race day what their body requires. Even though that requirement's lower, they've detrained their gut at a faster rate and they've reduced the amount that they need. So they're standing on the starting line in a position where they serve no chance. They have no chance on race day, and they don't even know it. They've made all the sacrifice in training, trained 15, 20 hours, whatever it is, and they have no chance and they don't even know it. So that's never a good position to be in. So instead, all of the recommendations that I made here tonight when it comes to carbohydrate quantity and all those things is all about, and practicing year round, it's about training your gut to be able to handle more and more, so that on race day we have a very big fueling window, which is what I show on the far right-hand side here, meaning the difference between what the body requires and what the athlete can handle is very big. Therefore, as we ramp up the intensity, the stress, the heat, all the different things that are laid on athletes on race day, it's very, very unlikely that they're going to have any issues. And honestly, that's how we've been successful with the core diet, is creating athletes that are able to do that, and therefore taking nutrition off the table as a limiter on race day. That's also why we're usually very hesitant to have athletes take a natural fueling plan approach. You know, the natural approach is logistically more difficult and runs the risk of having some fat fiber, more fat fiber and protein in there, which can run the risk of having GI distress. So if you are going to take the natural approach, that's okay. You may not sacrifice any performance if you practice it year-round very carefully and kind of get it down to science, take to heart all the recommendations that I gave here tonight around those natural fueling products, and you can get it done. So this is similar to the fueling window that I just showed, just another way, another chart, if you will, to show what I just showed. I'm not going to go through it again. You guys can check it out in the slide deck later. Here's an example fueling plan for the typical performance-based plan using power bars, power gels, you know, general sport drink, whether it's Gatorade Endurance, Base Hydro, using Clif Blocks. These are all packaged products, manufactured products, okay? And here's an example natural plan. So this one uses all natural food items, natural sports drink, portables, you know, banana, but still tallies up. And remember, that's the key. Still tallies up the big three. The carbohydrate, sodium, and fluid contents are still commensurate with the athlete's requirements. And when athletes initially switch to natural fueling without understanding their needs in those three areas, that's where they run into trouble. So if you make sure that even when you take the natural approach, you meet the requirements of those big three, you've done 90% of the job. The last 5 or 10% of the job is just making sure there's not excessive amounts of fat, fiber, and protein in it. You do that, you're good to go. All right, that's everything I had to present here in terms of content. I did want to remind all of you that you guys get discounts with the Core Diet. You have a code. It's QT2-EN. I think we also have a similar code that's Core-EN, and here are the discounts that you guys get. If you guys wanted a natural fueling plan, our dietitians would do it for you. We'd give you some cautions around it, but then we would go ahead and do it for you. So we could certainly do that. Of course, we also do day-to-day body composition, day-to-day nutrition, so on and so forth. All that's via the Core Diet. Feel free to check out the website if you'd like to learn more. And I know Patrick and the rest of his team have some strong content on the back end of their website as well. So that's everything I had. As Patrick mentioned early on, as I've mentioned a couple times, if you're interested in what I had to say and the Core Diet beyond just going to the website and checking things out, you can jump on Amazon right now and buy my new book. It was published 2 days ago, so it's hot off the presses. It's in almost every bookstore, and in Amazon, it's actually the number one hot new release in the sports and training category on Amazon right now for the last 2 days. So check it out. I think the retail, and it's on sale right now, is $19. But we have some more natural fuel ideas and recipes in there. We also have over 70 recipes that fit the Core Diet. So that's everything I had. I'm going to go ahead and open up the Q&A. I think Patrick's going to walk through your questions, and I'm going to do my best to answer them, and I appreciate everyone's attention tonight.
That's awesome. Awesome, Jesse. Incredible. Well, as I let you guys type your questions in, just to give a personal testimonial so you guys know, I finally buckled down and said I'm going to pull the trigger before Ironman Texas. I believe it was 2012, and finally said I'm tired of getting to mile 15 or 16 and literally having to walk for a couple miles to reset myself. And it was a game changer for a couple fundamental ways. Those of you who haven't had a chance to explore all of our notes and the testimonials inside the team, for me, the key elements of the Core Diet approach were being able to separate, my exercise nutrition from my daily nutrition. It made life so much easier for me. Instead of trying to eat like a pro triathlete 24 hours a day, I knew exactly what I needed to do and when. It made food more simple for my family. We didn't have special dinners just for Dad. And it was great. The only downside I think was that I had to spend a lot of money on nutrition for all of the products that I was training with. But the return, the upside and performance was just off the charts. And so I can't say enough good things about it. And the plan you've seen, the fueling plan's exactly what it is. You get stuff for whether it's a full, a half, Olympic distance, road races. Anytime you need it, it's right there. So it's all fantastic. So. This is great stuff, and one of the reasons why we decided to have you on, Jesse, was because I get a lot of feedback from people who are like, I bought this product, or my friend's using this product. I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna try it, and it drives me crazy. But I'm not an expert, so I wanted to have you on to talk a little bit about the ramifications of making natural choices, and also just sort of following some basic fads. You can't get away from the fact that, like you said, you've got those big three, you've got to nail them. So I'll be really curious to see what some of the folks have here. So some of the questions we have off the bat here, we've got Ellen, who's first. Thank you, Ellen, for your question. She says, I'm the person whose gut can't handle the amount of fluid I need to take in. I'm a huge salty sweater. How do I handle this? It should be a pretty easy one for you, Jesse. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, just to make you feel a little bit better, I've personally worked with athletes who have, and Patrick's a heavy sweater, so I've worked with athletes that are heavier sweaters than even Patrick, and I've had athletes that on a course like Ironman Texas have had 24 bottles over the course of the bike ride, and the athlete I have in mind was riding a 4-hour and 40-minute bike split there. So over 4 hours and 40 minutes, he was drinking 24 bottles. So do the math on that. It's 5 bottles, 24-ounce bottles of sport drink per hour. So hopefully that makes you feel a little bit better. How did he go, or how did he get to the point where he's able to handle that many bottles over the course of an Ironman bike split? He practiced it every single day, 365 days a year. And one thing I didn't mention here tonight is if you are that person, not only should you practice what you think your body requires on a daily basis, every single training session, 365 days a year, because it is your number one limiter, but when you get within about 10 days of a key race, especially if it's going to be a more hot, humid race, I recommend that you bump up the amount that you're drinking by 50%. So if in training you're drinking 3 bottles an hour or 2.5 bottles an hour, for the final 10 days, bump it up to 4.5 bottles an hour. The final race week, just drink as much as you possibly can. What that does is it overcompensates and prepares your gut to be able to handle the race day fuels, and then you actually step it down on race day. See, nobody ever does that. Everybody else, they barely practice what they should be in training, and then they step it up on race day to this great plan that they've laid out. Well, guess what? You try to step it up under higher intensity, higher stress, higher heat stress, all these different things. Of course, it's not going to work. So instead, we overcompensate the final 10 days, and then we step it down and add other stress. It's no problem. Okay, so that's the best way to deal with it. But sometimes it can take up to a year to get to the point where you can handle what your body requires.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can't stress that enough. We talk about it. Actually, it's kind of funny. Until a few years ago, we had a lot of people who struggle workouts in the winter. And it was only after going through the core diet process and just having that daily habit of fueling myself that I had the wherewithal to ask athletes, well, you go to the basement to ride the trainer, what are you eating? What are you consuming for this hour bike ride? And almost without a doubt, people are like, oh, yeah, I'm just going else. I don't need anything. Like maybe some water. I'm fine. I've got nothing.
It's a funny thing people say. You hear that all the time. Well, I don't need anything. Since when is it a contest about trying to eat as little as possible? Like, it's not just about needing it. Yeah, of course, you can probably go out for 4 hours and not need it. But think about what you're doing. You're detraining your stomach so that on race day you'll handle less. And you're digging the glycogen deficit so deep that it's going to take you 36 hours to replenish the glycogen stores, and you're probably going to have another workout within that 36 hours. So it's just, I don't know what it is. It's ignorance or stupidity or both. But we're here to help and tell you the right thing to do. So you just got to take trust, which is
right.
Usually the case, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, also, these are the same people who are obsessive about, watts or speed.
Exactly.
They want all those things, and this is a basic need. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we got another question here from Carolyn. She's asking specifically about the product Tailwind. The claim there is that it's everything you need for race day. How do you feel about going with a single product? I know you touched on this a little bit.
Oh, let me pop that one open and see exactly what's in it. I know I've dealt with it at some point here, though. Let me just take.
I know one of the things that we've spoken about before is just, and you mentioned it in this webinar as well, was the diversity of carbohydrate sources and the importance of that in your plan. I know from an athlete perspective, just having a similar fuel, bike and run, for example, is, and a course of an Ironman is typically a recipe for disaster. So having different carbohydrate sources, moving from the gels to the Clif Bloks, for example, has proven to be really helpful for me in terms of that total day performance.
So, Tailwind, no, absolutely, Patrick. And, I'm looking at Tailwind right now. Their endurance fuel drink it's a fine fuel in terms of its carbohydrate content and sodium content. It's no different than any other endurance sports drink, though. And I will say that it's very singular in its sugar source. So pretty much just has, and that's not too singular, it's dextrose and sucrose. So in that case, honestly, this is almost identical to Gatorade Endurance. Really very, very little difference. Gatorade Endurance is also a 2-sugar source. Sucrose is table sugar, and dextrose is the most high glycemic sugar known to man. So this is a very so-called sweet endurance sports drink. But in terms of having everything you need on race day, not even close, unless you mix the bottles very, very heavily. Again, go back to the basics, the big 3, calculate how much you need, and then you just figure out how you want to put it back. Usually the lion's share of how you put it back comes through the drink. But most athletes, unless they're a very high sweat rate, and the only people that can get away with just sports drink on race day, I have one athlete that I've worked with even in the last 2 years that fell into this category. She's very small. She weighs about 110 pounds, 105 pounds, and she has a very high sweat rate. So the high sweat rate tells her she needs to drink a lot of sports drink. Because she drinks a lot of sports drink, the byproduct is a lot of carbohydrate. Because she's small, she doesn't require that much carbohydrate, and therefore she gets away with almost just sports drink. So those are the only folks, though. If you're not super light with super high sweat rate, you're probably going to have something in addition to the sports drink.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. And I would say, if anyone has any last questions, please put them in. But I will say, for me, one of the things that I noticed, and it's hard to tell now in the winter, with the nutrition side. But, for me, what I noticed with my longer workouts was that I would actually get stronger. I was fueling properly, getting in the carbohydrates I needed. And that my, typical bike workouts where hour 4, hour 5 were just, a mental battle, which I assumed was part of the rite of passage. And this is making me stronger for race day. It actually turned around to where eating properly on the bike, drinking properly, meant at the end of my workouts, I was really strong. And not just that, when I finished the workouts, I felt fine. I could have my recovery drink and I was fine. Whereas before, when I was fueling improperly, I'd get off the bike and I'd want to, kill someone for their pizza and eat anything else I could find in my fridge. Which is just I think people think that's just like hey, I'm an endurance athlete. That's what I'm supposed to feel. And that's, to me, that's a massive, you know, sign that you're doing things wrong nutritionally when you're
It's a
out there.
funny thing, people are funny when you're more educated now and you stand back. You're like, wait a minute, I starved myself for 3 hours for no reason, made it a lower quality training session. So then when I came back, I made poor nutrition choices because I was so ravenous because I was so depleted. Like, this is just a stupid process. Like, why don't I just give my body what it requires so that I don't have a nutritionally limited session? And then when I get back, I'm less ravenous. I didn't deplete muscle glycogen nearly as much, and therefore I'll make more intelligent, more nutrient-dense choices. You know what I mean? In accordance with the core diet. So it's crazy.
Awesome, awesome. Well, let's do one last question here from Arnold Schmidt, who's a very competitive age group athlete, and he was asking about considerations for vegan athletes. Is there anything that you guys have, from your experiences in working with vegan folks around their nutrition?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the one of the biggest things with vegan athletes is obviously getting enough branched chain amino acid in to facilitate muscle protein resynthesis following more difficult training sessions. Many times vegan athletes end up being strength limited just because of the lack of protein or lack of proper branched chain amino acid content in their dietary intake. So for those athletes that are starting to become more strength limited taking the vegan approach, most athletes who are doing Ironman who are vegans, we generally recommend that they take one single amino acid, and it's L-leucine. If you're not having animal-based protein sources, you're usually deficient to some degree in L-leucine. So I would certainly recommend that. And of course, making sure that via vegan sources you're getting in a reasonable amount of protein. Obviously dependent on your body size, but probably not less than 70 to 80 grams a day. So I would just make sure you're at least hitting that threshold in terms of total protein content, and then making sure that you're probably supplementing with an L-leucine supplement just to support muscle recovery, because that's what you're most likely to be deficient in. So those are some of the key things. In terms of fueling itself, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, just take any of the products that we went through today and just cross-check them against the vegan requirements. And as long as you meet the big three, you're good to go. Because protein isn't a massive requirement on race day for up to Ironman distance, it's not that big of a deal to be a vegan and properly race fuel. But we work with tons of vegans. We probably get in the door 4 to 5 vegans a month that our dietitians work with.
Okay. Okay, awesome. That's super helpful. Thank you. Well, everyone, I want to thank you for attending, and Jesse, you as well. Thank you for your time and your expertise. Those of you who are still on the fence, the book is the Endurance Training Diet and Cookbook. And being able to add some of these recipes, I'm actually amazed at how my kids actually they actually enjoy eating healthy food because it actually tastes good. And so you definitely want to check that out. Add that stuff into your repertoire. The core diet, obviously, you'll find all of that in our store section on the website, where you can find all of our discount codes. For those of you who are looking for that edge or trying to make a big change for this season, changing your engine, how you function as a human, is possible through good nutrition and practice. And the core diet folks are the ones to do that. So, Jesse, once again, thanks so much for your time. And everyone else, if you have questions, I'll be sure to collect them and send them along. But other than that, have a great night, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
All right, see ya.